When Brittany walked into the grand hall of the Kensington estate, clutching Richard's arm like a trophy, she thought she had already won the war. She looked at Claire, Richard's quiet, diligent wife, and saw nothing but an obstacle to be removed. Brittany mocked Claire's dress, intentionally spilled vintage Cabernet on her shoes, and called her a glorified maid in front of the state's elite. Richard, the arrogant husband, simply laughed, believing his inheritance was secure. But they forgot one crucial detail. Deeds don't lie. In a twist that silenced the room, the family patriarch didn't just defend his daughter-in-law. He revealed a secret that left the cheaters homeless. You need to hear how a mistress's arrogance cost a husband everything he thought he owned. The Kensington estate sat atop the highest hill in Greenwich, a sprawling masterpiece of Georgian architecture that seemed to look down on the rest of the world. For Claire, however, the mansion wasn't a symbol of power. It was a high-maintenance beast she was expected to tame daily. It was the day of Arthur Kensington's 70th birthday, the biggest social event of the season. Arthur, a man who had built a shipping empire from a single tugboat, was a legend in Connecticut. His son Richard was the man who wore the suits Arthur paid for. Claire stood in the center of the ballroom, a clipboard pressed against her chest. She was dressed in a simple, elegant navy gown that she had bought off the rack 3 years ago. It was practical. It allowed her to move, to direct the catering staff, to fix floral arrangements, and to dodge the verbal barbs her husband usually threw her way. "Claire!" Richard's voice boomed from the grand staircase. She flinched slightly, but composed herself before turning around. Richard descended the stairs, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Italian tuxedo. He was handsome in a conventional, polished way, but his eyes carried a perpetual sneer, as if he smelled something unpleasant whenever he looked at his wife. "Yes, Richard? Why aren't the centerpieces finished?" He gestured vaguely at the tables, which were, in fact, fully set with exquisite white lilies, Arthur's favorite. "They are finished, Richard," Claire said softly. "I checked them myself." Richard walked up to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and the scotch he'd been drinking since noon. "They look cheap, like something you'd find at a discount store. Just because you come from nothing, Claire, doesn't mean you have to drag this family down to your level." It was an old wound he loved to press. Claire had been a scholarship student at the university where they met. She had been working 3 jobs to support her sick mother. Richard had been the savior who swept her off her feet, or so the narrative went. Over the last 5 years, however, the savior had turned into a warden. "I'll have the florist add more baby's breath," Claire said, her voice steady. She had learned long ago that fighting back only extended the argument. "Do that, and for God's sake, fix your hair. You look like you've been scrubbing floors," Richard sneered. "Tonight is about my family, my father. I need you to look the part of a Kensington wife, not the help." He brushed past her, heading toward the bar. Claire took a deep breath, fighting the sting of tears. She didn't have time to cry. Arthur was the only one in this house who treated her with genuine kindness, and she wanted tonight to be perfect for him. Arthur Kensington was a hard man, but fair. Since his wife passed away a decade ago, he had become somewhat reclusive, leaving the day-to-day operations of the business to Richard. But everyone knew Arthur still held the reins. What Richard didn't know, what no one knew, was the content of the quiet conversations Claire and Arthur often had in the library while Richard was out, networking, at clubs till 3 a.m. As guests began to arrive, luxury cars lining up the long gravel driveway, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense preparation to polished performance. Senators, CEOs, and local socialites flooded the hall. Claire retreated to the background, ensuring glasses were filled and coats were taken. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Arthur, looking frail but sharp-eyed in his tuxedo. "You've outdone yourself, Claire," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "The house looks beautiful. It feels warm, like it did when Margaret was alive." "Thank you, Arthur," Claire smiled, a genuine expression breaking through her stress. "Happy birthday." "Where is that son of mine?" Arthur asked, scanning the room with a frown. "I believe he's greeting the VIPs near the entrance," Claire lied. She knew Richard was actually near the bar, already loud and boasting about the promotion he expected Arthur to announce tonight. Richard was convinced that tonight Arthur would officially step down and hand over the entire Kensington portfolio, including the deed to this estate, to him. "Humph," Arthur grunted. "Keep an eye on him, Claire. I have a bad feeling about tonight." Arthur's intuition had built an empire. Claire should have listened to the warning bells ringing in her head. The string quartet was playing a soft waltz when the heavy oak doors swung open, creating a draught that flickered the candles in the foyer. Richard was standing near the entrance, laughing loudly at a joke made by a banking executive. But his laughter cut off abruptly, replaced by a wide, predatory grin as he looked at the newcomer. Walking through the door was a woman who clearly had no intention of blending in. She wore a dress of crimson silk, cut so low and slit so high it bordered on scandalous for a family gathering. Diamonds glittered at her throat, diamonds that looked suspiciously newer and larger than anything Claire owned. It was Brittany. Claire froze near the kitchen entrance. She knew Brittany. Technically, Brittany was the new public relations consultant Richard had hired 6 months ago. But Claire wasn't stupid. She had seen the texts pop up on Richard's phone late at night. She had smelled the distinct, cloying perfume on his shirts, the same perfume that was now wafting across the room, overpowering the scent of the lilies. Brittany didn't wait to be greeted. She strutted into the room, scanning the crowd until her eyes locked on Richard. Then her gaze slid past him and landed on Claire. A smirk, cold and sharp as a scalpel, curled her red lips. Richard immediately abandoned the banking executive and moved to Brittany's side. He didn't look ashamed. He looked proud. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture far too intimate for a boss and his consultant. "Everyone," Richard's voice carried over the music, "I'd like you to meet the woman who has been revolutionizing our brand image, Brittany Vance." A ripple of polite applause went through the room, though several of the older society wives exchanged knowing, judgmental glances. They knew a mistress when they saw one. Claire felt sick, bringing her here to Arthur's birthday, into their home. It was a violation. She straightened her spine. She was the hostess. She had to handle this with dignity. She walked over, her hands clasped in front of her. "Hello, Brittany. We weren't expecting you. I don't believe we have a place setting for you at the main table." Brittany laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on the nerves. She looked Claire up and down, her eyes lingering on Claire's sensible shoes. "Oh, don't worry about the table, sweetie," Brittany said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. "Richard said I could sit next to him. I'm sure you can find a spot in the kitchen or wherever it is you usually eat." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard chuckled, breaking the tension. "She's joking, Claire. Lighten up. Brittany is here as a vital part of the company. She needs to be at the head table for the announcement later." "The announcement?" Claire asked, her stomach dropping. "My retirement," Arthur's voice cut in. The old man had approached them, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked at Brittany with eyes like flint. I wasn't aware we were turning my birthday into a board meeting, Richard. Father, Richard beamed, seemingly oblivious to the ice in the air. This is Brittany. She's the future of Kensington PR. I wanted her here to celebrate with us. Brittany extended a hand to Arthur, flashing a blinding smile. It is an honor, Mr. Kensington. Richard talks about you constantly. He says you're ready to finally rest. Arthur didn't take her hand. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked at his son. Is that so? Absolutely, Richard said, guiding Brittany further into the room. Come on, let's get you a drink. Claire, get Brittany a glass of the vintage champagne, the 98. Claire stood rooted to the spot. The 98 was Arthur's private reserve, meant for the toast. Richard, that's for the toast, Claire whispered. Just do it, Claire, Richard snapped, his facade of politeness slipping. Stop being so stingy. It's my house, isn't it? Or it will be in about an hour. Pour the drink. Brittany leaned in toward Claire, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still audible to the guests nearby. Go on, honey. You're good at serving, aren't you? It suits you. That dress certainly screams staff. She reached out and flicked the strap of Claire's navy gown. Polyester. It's silk, Claire said quietly. Could have fooled me, Brittany smirked, turning her back on Claire to accept a glass of wine from a passing waiter, which she immediately, accidentally, tipped. Red wine splashed across the front of Claire's dress, soaking into the fabric and ruining the clean lines. Oops, Brittany gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. Oh my God, I am so clumsy. Richard, look what I did to poor Claire's outfit. It's fine, Richard said dismissively, not even looking at his wife. It was an old dress anyway. Claire, go change, and try to put on something that doesn't look like a sack this time. Claire looked around the room. Dozens of eyes were on her. Some held pity, others amusement. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, the humiliation burning her skin. She looked at Arthur. The old man's knuckles were white as he gripped his cane, his face a mask of fury. But before Arthur could speak, Claire stepped back. I'll go change, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. As she walked toward the stairs, she heard Brittany's voice floating after her. Maybe check the lost and found. They might have something better. Laughter followed. Richard's laughter. Claire reached the top of the stairs and turned the corner, out of sight. She didn't go to her bedroom to cry. She went to the master study, Arthur's study. She walked over to the safe behind the painting, her fingers trembling but precise as she dialed in the combination. She wasn't just the wife. For the last 5 years, she had been Arthur's personal accountant, the only one he trusted to manage the private assets Richard knew nothing about. She pulled out a thick leather folder. Her tears had dried. If Richard wanted a show, she would give him one. Downstairs, the party was getting louder. Brittany was now sitting in Arthur's chair at the head of the table, holding court. Richard was standing to make a speech, tapping a spoon against his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard bellowed, "if I could have your attention—" Claire stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the folder. It was time to go back down. Richard tapped the crystal glass with a silver spoon, the sharp ting-ting-ting slicing through the murmured conversations of the hall. The room fell silent, faces turning toward the head of the table where Richard stood, flushed with wine and arrogance. Brittany sat beside him, preening like a cat that had just stolen the cream, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who believes he is untouchable. "Tonight, we celebrate my father, Arthur. 70 years. A long time." He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. But as we look back, we must also look forward. Kensington shipping has been the backbone of this town for decades, but it's time for a new era, a modern era. He looked down at Brittany and smiled. And a modern era requires modern leadership and modern partners. Claire descended the stairs quietly. She had changed into a cream-coloured pantsuit, the one she wore for board meetings. It was sharp, professional, and commanded respect. She held the leather folder against her side, her face unreadable. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, watching her husband. Richard continued, oblivious to her return. You see, for a long time, I have felt held back, weighed down by outdated traditions, and frankly, outdated relationships. A hush fell over the room. The guests exchanged nervous glances. This was veering away from a birthday toast into something far more uncomfortable. I am happy to announce, Richard said, his voice rising, that as I take full control of the company starting tomorrow, I will be making changes in my personal life as well. Brittany isn't just my consultant. She is the woman who understands the future I am building. She is my partner in every sense of the word. He paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the blow he had clearly been rehearsing. Claire and I will be separating, effective immediately. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered loudly against a china plate. Richard didn't stop. It's for the best. Claire is wonderful. Domestic manager. But she was never cut out for this world. She struggles to fit in. She struggles to understand the complexities of high society. Honestly, I'm doing her a favor. She can go back to her simple life, and I can finally have a wife who looks the part of Kensington. Brittany beamed, actually waving to the crowd as if she had just won a beauty pageant. We're so excited, she chirped. And don't worry, we'll make sure Claire is taken care of. We'll give her a nice severance package. Maybe enough to buy a little condo in the bad part of town where she feels more at home. Laughter bubbled up from Richard and Brittany, solitary and cruel in the silent room. That was when Arthur slammed his cane onto the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot. Sit down, Richard, Arthur growled, remaining seated, but radiating enough power to level a building. Now, Dad, Richard said, waving a hand dismissively. Don't get sentimental. You know I'm right. Claire is a drag on the family name. Look at her. He pointed a finger toward the back of the room, finally spotting Claire. She's wearing a suit to a gala. Who does that? She looks like a secretary. Claire stepped forward. The crowd parted for her, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a judge. I'm wearing a suit, Richard, Claire said, her voice clear and projecting without a microphone. Because I am working. Unlike you, who seems to think running a company involves drinking scotch and humiliating your family. Excuse me? Richard's face turned a mottled red. How dare you speak to me like that in my house, in front of my guests? Brittany stood up, tossing her hair. You need to leave, Claire. You're embarrassing yourself. Richard just dumped you. Have some dignity and walk out before security drags you out. Security won't be dragging anyone out, Claire said calmly. She walked all the way to the head table, stopping directly across from the lovers. She placed the leather folder on the table next to Arthur's cake. What is this? Richard sneered, looking at the folder. Your grocery list. Your budget for cleaning supplies. It's an audit, Claire said. Richard froze. An audit of the public relations account you opened 6 months ago, Claire continued, opening the folder. The account you've been using to pay Brittany's consulting fees. She pulled out a spreadsheet, the lines highlighted in damning yellow. $50,000 for brand strategy in May. $70,000 for image consultation in June. $100,000 for crisis management in July. Interestingly, there was no crisis in July, unless you count the purchase of a diamond necklace from Tiffany's, which was charged to the corporate card on July 14th. She looked at the diamonds around Brittany's neck. Lovely piece. It cost the company shareholders exactly $112,000. The room erupted in whispers. Brittany's hand flew to her necklace, covering it instinctively. "You're lying," Brittany shrieked. "Richard, tell them she's lying. I worked for that money." "Did you?" Claire asked, pulling out another document. "Because according to the timesheets Richard signed, you billed for 300 hours last month. That's 10 hours a day, every single day. Yet your Instagram shows you were in Cabo for 2 weeks of that month." Richard slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Enough! You have no right to snoop through my company finances. I am the CEO. I approve the expenses. I can spend the money however I want." "Actually," Arthur spoke up, his voice low and dangerous, "you are the acting CEO, Richard, and an acting CEO has a fiduciary duty to the board, which you have breached." "Oh, please, Dad," Richard scoffed, turning on his father. "Who's the board? You? You're an old man. You can barely walk. The board will side with me. I'm the one bringing in the profit. I'm the one dealing with the future. You're just history." Richard grabbed Brittany's hand. "Come on, let's go to study. I'm done with this party. I'm going to call the lawyers and get the eviction notice drafted for Claire tonight. I want her out of my house by morning." "Your house?" Claire asked. Her tone wasn't angry. It was almost pitiable. "Yes, my house," Richard yelled. "It's the Kensington estate. I am Kensington. It's my birthright. And once Dad signs the transfer papers tonight, which he will do, it will legally be mine." He looked at Arthur expectantly. "Well, give them to me. Let's get this over with so I can kick her out." Arthur looked at his son with a mixture of profound sadness and steely resolve. He slowly reached into his inner jacket pocket. Richard grinned, extending his hand greedily. Arthur pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. But he didn't hand it to Richard. He handed it to Claire. "Read it, Claire," Arthur said, "so everyone can hear." Richard lowered his hand, confused. "What is that? Why are you giving it to her?" Claire unfolded the document. The paper was thick, official, and bore the raised seal of the state of Connecticut. She adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the familiar text she had helped draft 3 years ago. "This," Claire announced, her voice ringing through the hall, "is a quitclaim deed dated October 14th, 2022. 2022? Richard frowned. "That was 3 years ago. What are you talking about?" "Read the transfer clause, Claire," Arthur commanded, taking a sip of water. Claire looked up at the crowd, then locked eyes with Brittany, whose smirk was beginning to falter. "I, Arthur William Kensington," Claire read, "being of sound mind, do hereby transfer all rights, title and interest in the property known as the Kensington Estate, located at 14 Hilltop Drive, Greenwich, to the Kensington Family Trust." Richard let out a harsh laugh. "Okay, so what? I am the beneficiary of the trust. That just means I own it through trust. You're trying to scare me with legal jargon, Claire, but you're failing." "Keep reading," Arthur said. "The sole trustee and beneficiary of the Kensington Family Trust," Claire continued, emphasizing every syllable, "is Claire Marie Kensington." The silence in the room was absolute. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the mansion. Richard blinked. He shook his head, as if trying to clear water from his ears. "What? That's impossible. That's a mistake. It's a typo." "It is not a typo," Arthur said. He stood up, and this time he didn't lean on his cane. He stood tall, the titan of industry re-emerging from the shell of the old man. 3 years ago, Richard, I had a heart attack, Arthur said. You remember? You came to the hospital for 10 minutes. You checked your watch 3 times, and then you left to go play golf. I had a meeting, Richard protested, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. You played 18 holes, Arthur corrected. Claire stayed. She stayed for 4 days. She slept in the chair next to my bed. She managed the company from her laptop while feeding me ice chips. Arthur gestured around the room. I watched you, Richard. For years. I watched you treat this house like a hotel and this woman like a servant. I watched you spend money you didn't earn. And I realized something terrifying. If I died, you would destroy everything I built in a year. And you would leave Claire with nothing. Arthur walked around the table to stand next to Claire. He put an arm around her shoulder. So I made a choice. I decided to give my legacy to the only person who actually cared about it, the only person who knows how to run the business, the only person who loves this family, even when this family treated her like garbage. He pointed a shaking finger at Richard. You don't own this house, Richard. You don't own the furniture. You don't own the wine you're drinking. You are a guest. And you are a guest only because Claire has been kind enough to let you stay here. Richard's face went from red to a ghostly white. He looked at Brittany, seeking support. Brittany, however, was doing the math. Her eyes darted from Richard to Claire, then to the exit. She took a step away from Richard. Wait, Brittany said, her voice trembling. So, he's broke? He has a trust fund, Arthur said dryly. It pays out a living allowance, $5,000 a month, enough for a modest apartment and groceries, hardly enough to support a habit of Tiffany diamonds and trips to Cabo. Brittany's face crumpled. She looked at Richard with pure disgust. You told me you were worth $200 million. You told me you owned the fleet. I will, Richard stammered, grabbing Brittany's arm. I will. This is senility. He's crazy. I'll contest it in court. I'll sue. You can try, Claire said, closing the folder. But this deed was notarized, witnessed, and filed 3 years ago. The statute of limitations for contesting it based on capacity has passed. And since I have power of attorney over Arthur's affairs, signed at the same time, I have access to the recordings of the lawyers verifying his mental state. She looked at her husband, her soon-to-be ex-husband, with a look of finality. Richard, you wanted a divorce? You have it. I accept. But since you so rudely pointed out that this is no longer your marriage, I must point out that this is no longer your home. Richard stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You can't kick me out. I'm Kensington. And I, Claire said, am the owner, and I have a strict policy against guests who insult the hostess and spill wine on the carpet. She turned to the security guards standing by the door, men she had hired, men she paid. Gentlemen, Claire said softly, please escort Mr. Kensington and Ms. whatever her name is, off the property. You can't do this, Richard screamed, lunging toward Claire. The security guards moved faster than he did. 2 large men intercepted him, grabbing him by the arms. Get your hands off me, Richard roared, struggling. Do you know who I am? I am your boss. Actually, sir, one of the guards said calmly, Mrs. Kensington signs the checks. As they began to drag Richard toward the door, Brittany let out a screech. I didn't do anything. I was lied to. Richard lied to me. Claire, sweetie, please, we can talk about this. Women support women, right? Claire looked at Brittany, who was now pleading, her arrogance dissolved into pathetic desperation. Women support women, Claire agreed. But I don't support parasites. Goodbye, Brittany." The guards took Brittany by the elbow. She tried to resist, her high heels skidding on the polished floor, but it was no use. The guests watched in stunned silence as the future of the company and his mistress were hauled out of the birthday party like unruly teenagers. When the heavy oak door slammed shut, the echo rang through the hall. Arthur cleared his throat. He looked at the shocked crowd. "Well," Arthur said, lifting his glass, "now that the trash has been taken out, who wants cake?" The room erupted in applause. It started slow, then grew into a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was genuine, enthusiastic cheering. Claire felt a hand squeeze hers. She looked down at Arthur. He winked. But the story wasn't over. Richard wasn't the type of man to go quietly into the night. He had been humiliated, disinherited, and stripped of his power in front of the entire town. A man like that doesn't learn a lesson. He seeks revenge. And as Claire would soon find out, the deed to the house was just the first battle. Richard had one card left to play, a secret he had been keeping for years, buried deep in the company archives, something that could send both Arthur and Claire to prison if it came to light. As the party resumed, Claire saw a text message pop up on her phone. It was from Richard. "This isn't over. Check the shipping manifests for container 404. If I go down, you're all coming with me." Claire's blood ran cold. She knew about container 404, or at least she thought she did. The euphoria of the ballroom evaporated the moment Claire showed Arthur the text message. The music had stopped, the staff was clearing away the half-eaten cake, and the grand estate, which had felt like a fortress moments ago, now felt like a house of cards. "Container 404. Arthur squinted at the screen, his face grey under the crystal chandelier light. "We don't have a container 404 on the active manifest. The numeric sequence for this quarter ends at 390. "He says he has proof, Arthur," Claire said, her thumb hovering over the screen. "Richard is vindictive, but he isn't creative enough to invent a specific container number unless it actually exists. If he's threatening us with it, he's planted something." Arthur gripped his cane. "We need to go to the office, now." They left the cleanup to the head housekeeper and drove in Arthur's vintage Bentley toward the port of New Haven. The drive was silent. The Connecticut coastline flashed by, dark and ominous. Claire's mind raced. She knew the company books inside out. She knew every ledger, every expense report, every tax filing. If Richard had hidden something, he had done it off the books, or worse, he had done it on the books, disguised as something else. When they arrived at the Kensington shipping headquarters, the building was a monolith of glass and steel overlooking the dark waters of the Long Island Sound. The security guard, a man named Miller who had worked there for 20 years, looked surprised to see them at 11:00 p.m. on a Saturday. "Mr. Kensington? Mrs. Kensington?" Miller tipped his cap. "Everything all right? I saw the pictures from the party online. It looked like quite the event." "Just some last-minute paperwork, Miller," Claire said, keeping her voice steady. "Has Richard been in the office lately?" Miller scratched his chin. "Funny you ask. He was here last night. Came in around 2 a.m. Said he forgot his golf clubs. I stayed in the server room for about an hour. I thought it was odd, but he's the boss. Or he was." Claire and Arthur exchanged a look. The server room. They took the elevator to the top floor. Claire sat at her desk, not the CEO's desk, but her modest workspace in the finance corner. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the central logistics database. "Search for 404 in the shadow logs," Arthur instructed, leaning over her shoulder. "If he bypasses the main manifest, it'll be in the quarantined holding queue." Claire typed the command. The screen flickered and a file popped up. Container ID, KUS 404, origin, Naples, Italy, declared cargo, marble statuary and garden ornaments. Consignee, Kensington Imports, LLC, authorized by C. Kensington. Claire gasped. He put my name on it. Authorized by C. Kensington. What's in it, Claire? Arthur asked, his voice tight. Claire drilled down into the digital bill of lading. On the surface, it looked legitimate. High-end marble statues for a landscape architecture firm in Boston. But the weight discrepancies were flagged in red. The container was 3 tons lighter than it should have been for marble. It's not marble, Claire whispered. She pulled up the customs scan images that had been bypassed in the system. Richard had used an administrator override code to suppress the X-ray flags. She accessed the raw image data. It wasn't stone, it was hollow, and inside the hollow casings, high-grade narcotics, Arthur breathed, recoiling from the screen. Or synthetic components. That's a smuggling operation. If that container hits the dock and customs opens it, we go to federal prison for trafficking. And look at the timestamp on the authorization. Claire pointed to the screen. It was digitally signed with my encryption key yesterday at 2:30 a.m., while I was asleep, while he was in the server room. Richard hadn't just stolen money. He had set up a fail-safe. He had framed his wife as the mastermind of an international smuggling ring. Her phone buzzed again. It was Richard. Found it yet? The feds get an anonymous tip in exactly 60 minutes, unless you transfer the deed back to me and wire $5 million to my offshore account. The choice is yours, wifey. Claire stared at the phone. She felt a wave of nausea. This was why he had been so confident. This was why he laughed when she threatened divorce in the past. He had been building this leverage for months, waiting for the moment she tried to leave him. He's going to burn the company to the ground just to hurt me, Claire said, her voice trembling. Arthur, this ends the legacy. If the FBI raids us, assets are frozen. The reputation is destroyed. We're finished. Arthur sank into a chair, looking suddenly very old. I underestimated him. I thought he was just greedy. I didn't know he was evil. Claire looked at the old man, defeated in his own office. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at the override code Richard had used. Something clicked in her brain. Richard was arrogant. He was vindictive. But he was also lazy. He never read the fine print. He never updated his passwords. And he certainly never understood that Claire wasn't just a domestic manager. She was a certified forensic accountant with a penchant for cybersecurity. Miller said he was in the server room for an hour, Claire murmured, her eyes narrowing. What? Arthur asked. Richard doesn't know how to code, Claire said, sitting up straighter. He doesn't know how to override a customs flag. He used a script, probably something he bought off the dark web or paid a hacker to install. She began typing furiously, opening the terminal command line. If he used a script, he left a digital footprint. He thinks using my login frames me. But the biometric data. She hit enter. The system log expanded. User, C. Kensington, login ID, terminal, physical access, server rack 4. Biometric verification, failed, override key used. He used an override key, Claire said, a small smile touching her lips. But look at the keystroke dynamics. Modern security systems didn't just track passwords. They tracked how you typed, the speed, the pressure, the rhythm. It was as unique as a fingerprint. I type at 90 words per minute with a specific rhythm, Claire explained, pointing to the graph. This user typed at 30 words per minute, hunt and peck style. That proves it wasn't you, Arthur said, hope returning to his eyes. But it doesn't prove it was him. No, Claire agreed, but the security camera inside the server room does. There are no cameras in the server room, Arthur sighed. We removed them last year for privacy compliance regarding the client data. You removed the visible cameras, Claire corrected him. I had a pinhole camera installed in the smoke detector 3 months ago when I noticed petty cash going missing. She opened a separate encrypted drive. She pulled up the footage from 2:00 a.m. the previous night. There, in grainy but undeniable black and white, was Richard. He was on the phone, holding a piece of paper with instructions, angrily typing into the console with one finger. "Pause it," Arthur commanded. Claire froze the frame. Richard was holding his phone up to the screen to take a picture of the success message. "He's sending the evidence to himself," Arthur noted. "We have him," Claire said. "But we still have the problem of the container. It arrives in port in..." She checked the tracker. 4 hours. If Richard tips off the feds, they'll raid the ship before we can explain. We'll still be dragged through the mud. "We need to stop him from making that call," Arthur said. "No," Claire said, her eyes cold. "We need him to make the call. But we need to change what's in the container." "How? It's on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic." "It's not in the Atlantic," Claire pointed to the map. "It's docking at the terminal. Right now, the manifest time was off by 4 hours because of the currents." Claire stood up. She grabbed her coat. "Arthur, call Miller. Tell him to get the forklift. We have exactly 45 minutes before Richard calls the FBI." Richard sat on the edge of the bed in the Golden Anchor Motel, a rundown establishment off I-95 that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. It was a far cry from the Kensington estate. Brittany was pacing the small room, still wearing her red dress, though it now looked garish under the flickering fluorescent lights. She was furiously texting on her phone. "Who are you texting?" Richard snapped, taking a swig from a warm bottle of soda from the vending machine. "My lawyer," Brittany spat back. "I'm trying to figure out if I can sue you for fraud. You told me you were a multi-millionaire, Richard. Now I'm in a roach motel." "Shut up, Brittany," Richard growled. "I told you this is temporary. By tomorrow morning, Claire will be begging me to take the house back. She'll be on her knees." He checked his watch. "She has 10 minutes left." "You're delusional," Brittany scoffed. "She kicked you out. She owns the deed. You're nothing." "I own her freedom," Richard yelled. "I have her on the hook for a federal crime. Do you think she wants to go to jail? She's soft. She'll fold." His phone rang. It was Claire. Richard smirked. He held the phone up for Brittany to see. "See? Like clockwork." He answered the speaker. "Well, well. Ready to negotiate, darling?" "I'm outside." Claire's voice came through, calm and detached. "Room 12. Richard frowned. "How did you know?" "Your GPS is still linked to the family plan, Richard. I pay the phone bill, remember?" Richard cursed and went to the door. He threw it open. Claire was standing in the parking lot. She wasn't alone. Arthur was sitting in the Bentley, the engine running, watching with a grim expression. But Claire stood solo, holding a manila envelope. "Come in." Richard stepped back, trying to regain his composure. "Sorry about the accommodations. It's all I could afford since you stole my inheritance." Claire walked into the dingy room. She looked at Brittany, who was huddled by the radiator, arms crossed. "Hello, Brittany," Claire said politely. "Still here?" "I'm leaving as soon as my Uber gets here," Brittany muttered. "Smart," Claire said. She turned to Richard. "You said you wanted the deed." "The deed, the trust, and 5 million cash," Richard demanded. "Or I call Agent Reynolds at the FBI. I have his direct line. He's very interested in narcotics trafficking." "Go ahead," Claire said. Richard blinked. "What?" "Call him," Claire said, sitting down on the unmade bed. "I'll wait." Richard stared at her. This wasn't the script. She was supposed to be crying. She was supposed to be begging. You think I'm bluffing? Richard pulled up the number. I'll do it, Claire. I'll send you to prison for 20 years. I know you're not bluffing about the container, Richard, Claire said. Container 404. Marble statuary. I saw the file. Then you know you're dead, Richard sneered. My name isn't on it. Yours is. True, Claire nodded. But there's one thing you forgot, Richard. You're not the logistics manager. I am. Richard hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. So what? So, Claire said, leaning forward. I track every shipment. 2 weeks ago, I noticed a weight anomaly with container 404 while it was still in Naples. I didn't know who authorized it then, but I knew it was suspicious. She tossed the manila envelope onto the bed. It slid open, revealing photos. Photos of the Italian police raiding a warehouse. I called the Italian authorities 14 days ago, Claire said. They intercepted the container before it was even loaded onto the ship. They seized the drugs. And do you know what they replaced them with? Richard's mouth went dry. He picked up the photos. They showed Italian police officers filling the hollow statues with sandbags. Sand, Claire said. Container 404 is full of sand, Richard. It arrived an hour ago. Customs already cleared it because, well, sand isn't illegal. Richard dropped the photos. His hands were shaking. No, that's... I tracked it. It said whatever the system told it to say, Claire said. Because I control the system. She stood up and walked over to him, her heels clicking on the cheap linoleum. So, here is where we stand. You attempted to frame me for international drug trafficking. That is a felony. You forged my digital signature. That is identity theft and fraud. And you tried to blackmail me. That is extortion. Claire pulled out her phone. I recorded this entire conversation, Richard. Just now. You are admitting to the scheme. Richard backed away until he hit the wall. Claire, wait, baby. We can work this out. I was angry. I was drunk. You know how I get it. I do know how you get, Claire said. That's why I brought the divorce papers. She pulled a thick document from her bag. Sign them. Full uncontested divorce. You get nothing. No alimony. No access to the trust. No shares in the company. You walk away with the clothes on your back and the cash currently in your wallet. And if I don't sign? Richard asked, sweat pouring down his face. Then I give the recording and the server room footage to the FBI, Claire said simply. And instead of being broke, you'll be broke and in federal prison. And trust me, Richard, you won't survive prison. They don't have country clubs there. Richard looked at Brittany. Brittany looked at him with pure loathing. Sign it, you idiot, Brittany hissed. Or I'll testify against you too, just to get a plea deal for being associated with you. Richard looked at the papers. His hand trembled as he took the pen Claire offered. He looked at his wife, really looked at her. For the first time in years. He saw the steel in her spine, the intelligence in her eyes. He realized, too late, that he had never really known her at all. He scribbled his signature. Claire took the papers back, checked the signature, and nodded. Goodbye, Richard, she said. She turned to leave. Claire! Richard called out, his voice cracking. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Claire paused at the door. She didn't look back. You're a modern man, Richard, she said, echoing his toast from the party. I'm sure you'll figure out a future. She walked out into the cool night air. Arthur unlocked the Bentley doors. Is it done? Arthur asked. It's done, Claire said, buckling her seatbelt. And the container? Sand, Claire smiled. Just sand. They drove away, leaving Richard alone in the neon glow of the motel sign. But as they merged onto the highway, heading back to the estate that was finally, truly theirs, Claire felt a strange sensation. It wasn't a relief. It was unease. Because Richard was desperate, and desperate men, when backed into a corner with nothing left to lose, don't always follow the logic of self-preservation. The phone in her pocket buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a text. It was a notification from the home security system. Alert, fire alarm triggered, main residence, zone, master bedroom. Claire's heart stopped. "Arthur," she whispered, "drive faster." The Bentley tore down the highway, the speedometer needle buried deep in the red. Arthur gripped the dashboard, his face pale, while Claire maneuvered the heavy vehicle with the precision of a stunt driver. In the distance, against the ink-black night sky of Greenwich, an orange glow pulsed like a second, angry sun. "It's the East Wing," Arthur choked out as they turned onto the private road leading up the hill. "The library. My wife's books." As they crested the hill, the full horror of the scene came into view. The Kensington estate, the symbol of power and endurance for 3 generations, was engulfed in flames. Tongues of fire licked out of the tall Georgian windows, shattering the glass with loud pops that sounded like gunfire. Thick, black smoke billowed into the air, blotting out the stars. Fire trucks were already swarming the driveway, their sirens wailing, red and blue lights flashing against the inferno. Firefighters were shouting orders, unreeling massive hoses to combat the beast eating the house. Claire slammed the brakes, screeching to a halt near the perimeter tape. She was out of the car before the engine died. "Arthur, stay here!" she commanded. "My house!" Arthur wailed, trying to open his door. "Claire, the portraits, the letters." "I'll handle it," Claire yelled over the roar of the fire. "Just stay safe." She ran toward the police line. A frantic officer intercepted her. "Ma'am, you can't go in there. It's structurally unstable." "I live here," Claire screamed. "Is anyone inside? The staff?" "The staff got out," the officer said, gripping her shoulders. "They're over by the ambulance, but we detained a suspect fleeing the scene near the back gardens." Claire froze. "A suspect?" The officer pointed toward a patrol car parked near the hedge maze. In the back seat, kicking at the window and screaming, was a woman in a torn red dress. Brittany. Claire marched over to the cruiser. Brittany looked wild, her makeup smeared with soot and tears, her hair singing at the ends. When she saw Claire, she stopped screaming and pressed her face against the glass, her eyes wide with a manic desperation. The officer opened the door slightly. "She claims she was just retrieving her property," the officer said skeptically. "But we found a gas can in the bushes with her fingerprints on it." "He made me do it!" Brittany shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at nothing. "Richard, he texted me. He said if I couldn't live there, no one could. He said, 'Burn the witch out.'" Claire stared at her. "Richard is at a motel 10 miles away, Brittany." "He told me to." Brittany sobbed, collapsing into a heap on the seat. "He said he'd pay me the $5 million if I did it. I just wanted the money. I deserve the money." Claire turned away, disgust rising in her throat. Brittany had destroyed a masterpiece of history for a promise from a bankrupt liar. Suddenly, a cab pulled up to the chaotic scene. The door opened and Richard stumbled out. He looked disheveled, panting, his eyes darting from the burning house to the police. He saw the flames, and a twisted look of satisfaction crossed his face for a split second, before he saw the police handcuffs on Brittany. "Richard!" Brittany screamed from the police car. Tell them you told me to do it!" Richard's face went white. He turned to run, but 2 officers were already on him. They tackled him to the gravel, pinning his arms behind his back. I didn't do anything, Richard howled, his face pressed into the dirt. She's crazy. I was at a motel. Check the cameras. We have the text messages, Richard, Brittany yelled, holding up her phone which the police had bagged as evidence. Burn it down. Make her pay. Sent at 11:45 p.m. Richard stopped struggling. He looked up, mud on his cheek, and locked eyes with Claire. He didn't see fear anymore. He saw a woman standing amidst the ruins of his life, untouched by the fire he had sparked. You took everything from me, Richard spat. Claire walked over, looking down at him. The heat from the fire was intense, but her voice was ice-cold. I took nothing, Richard. You gave it all away, piece by piece. You traded your inheritance for an affair. You traded your freedom for revenge. And now you've traded your name for a prison number. As they dragged Richard away to the squad car, a loud crash echoed from the house. The roof of the east wing collapsed, sending a shower of sparks into the sky. Arthur hobbled up beside Claire, leaning heavily on his cane. Tears streamed down his weathered face as he watched his life's work turn to ash. It's gone, Arthur whispered. Margaret's library, the nursery where we would have raised children. It's all gone. Claire wrapped her arm around the old man, holding him up. She looked at the fire, but she didn't see an end. She saw a beginning. The wood is gone, Arthur, Claire said softly. The stone is damaged. But the foundation? The foundation is solid. We still have the land. We still have the company. And most importantly, we have the truth. She turned him away from the flames. We'll rebuild, she promised. And this time, we'll build a home that is actually ours. No ghosts, no Richards. Just us. 6 months later, the sun was shining over Greenwich, illuminating the steel skeleton of the new Kensington estate. It was different, modern, open, filled with glass and light. It wasn't a fortress to hide in. It was a sanctuary. Claire stood on the balcony of the finished guest house, sipping her morning coffee. She wore a tailored suit, but this time it was by a designer she liked, not one Richard had approved. Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Department of Corrections. Inmate update. Richard Kensington. Status. Transfer complete to Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. Sentence. 15 years. Charges. Conspiracy to commit arson, wire fraud, attempted trafficking. Brittany had taken a plea deal, testifying against Richard in exchange for 5 years in minimum security. It turned out, loyalty bought with stolen diamonds doesn't last long in an interrogation room. Good news? Claire turned. Arthur was sitting at the patio table, reviewing the quarterly earnings report. He looked healthier than he had in years. The stress of Richard's mismanagement was gone, replaced by the thrill of watching Claire steer the company to record profits. Justice, Claire said, deleting the notification. Richard is settled in his new home. Arthur snorted. I hope he likes the view of the prison yard. It's the only real estate he'll ever see again. He put down the report and looked at his daughter-in-law. You know, the board voted this morning. Oh? Claire sat down. And? They voted unanimously, Arthur smiled, to remove acting from your title. You are officially the CEO of Kensington Shipping, Claire, the first female CEO in our history. Claire looked out at the construction site, where workers were laying the bricks for the new library. She thought about the shy girl who had married Richard, hoping for love, the woman who had been bullied and belittled, the wife who had been told she was nothing but a glorified maid. She took a sip of her coffee. It tasted like victory. Well, Claire said, picking up her briefcase. I suppose I should get to work. I have an empire to run. Arthur watched her walk toward the car, not the old sedan, but a sleek new coupe she had bought with her own bonus. The mistress had tried to bully the wife. The husband had tried to destroy her. But in the end, they learned the hardest lesson of all. You can burn down a house, but you cannot burn down a woman who has walked through fire and learned how to control the flame. The Kensington legacy wasn't the mansion on the hill. It was Claire. That is the story of how arrogance and greed met their match in a woman who knew her own worth. Richard and Brittany thought they could trample on Claire because she was quiet, failing to realize that the quietest people often have the loudest minds. They lost their freedom, their reputation, and their future, all because they underestimated the glorified maid who held the keys to the kingdom. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth always wins in the end. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.